Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Well, news coming out of Afghanistan. There is, of course, that news coming out of the Loya Jirga, where President Ashraf Ghani has now decided to release 175 Taliban prisoners as a gesture that was requested by the Loya Jirga's conclusions. The Grand Council has also demanded immediate and permanent ceasefire, to which the Taliban has responded that a ceasefire cannot be in place as long as foreign forces are in the country. On top of this, the United States has released how many civilians it has killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Somalia last year. Specifically, though, about Afghanistan, the estimates by the U.S. are 76 civilians killed and 58 injured, while the UN's figure is significantly higher, saying 393 civilians were killed and 239 were injured. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by former ambassador to Afghanistan, Mohammad Ayaz Wazir, who is joining us now from Islamabad on the line. We're also joined by Mirwais Khan, who is an international affairs analyst, and he covers Afghanistan affairs. He's joining us via Skype from the Pakistani capital. Mr. Khan and Ambassador Wazir, thank you both for joining us. Ambassador Wazir, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of the release of these Taliban prisoners as a peace gesture on the part of the Afghan government?
Well, it's obviously a good gesture if they've released the Taliban prisoners. That would pave the way, maybe soften the Taliban stance to talk to the Afghan government, because up till now, as you know, the Taliban have taken the stance that we are not going to talk to the Afghan government. They have not refused talking to the Afghan, intra-Afghan talks they would like to, but if that has representation of the Afghan government, then they had expressed reservations. So I think this would be this is a good gesture, and I'm sure now they would soften their stance, or some steps would be taken where the Afghan government's representation in the intra-Afghan dialogue would also be accommodated. So I take it as a good gesture.
Mr. Khan, I wonder if you agree with that, because the Taliban, seems to still be playing hardball, doesn't it? It says that it will not discuss or talk directly to the Afghan government, calling it essentially a puppet of the Americans. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Taliban will definitely are not ready to talk to government. That's true, but they are ready to talk to Afghan. There is a big difference between two, because they are not ready to talk. You saw that in Moscow, Taliban were talking to the ex-president of Ashraf Karzai. They talked to him regarding that. So,
but then Mirwais, why would they talk to Karzai? Karzai was also technically, as you said, a president. So if their argument is that they won't talk to somebody who's an American puppet, then the same argument can be made for Karzai, can't it?
But Karzai straight away denied they didn't sign that contract with America. He denied it. And of course, he got the place in Afghan circle or at that moment when he denied to sign that contract with America. And if you remember, at that moment, the Taliban spokesman have appreciated his work at that moment. So if you separated from America, so it doesn't mean that once you are sitting with America, the Taliban will never accept you. They will, but if you just move forward from that that circle, they will accept you at that moment. That thing goes to, they are ready to talk to Karzai, but they are not ready to talk to Ashraf Ghani. That's the reason that they don't want to talk to those people who are still engaged with America.
All right, so let's add another voice to this conversation. We're all joined by Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, who is a political and security analyst. He is an expert in Afghanistan. He's joining us on the line, I believe, from Peshawar. Mr. Yousafzai, thank you for taking your time out to join us here in Scope. Mr. Yousafzai, what do you make of the conclusions of the Loya Jirga? Quite a few points came out of that, but the main point seemed to be the release of these Taliban prisoners, as well as a call for a ceasefire.
I think this was to be expected, that the Loya Jirga, will call for a ceasefire and dialogue between the Afghan government and Taliban. This wasn't unexpected. The Loya Jirga, as we all know, has been called by the Afghan government, President Ashraf Ghani, to be precise. And so all the resolutions, all the decisions, I think they have been to be made on the direction of the president and his supporters, who were outnumbering everybody else in the Jirga. So that has been now done. Resolutions, there's no harm in highlighting these issues.
Right.
I think this is the way forward. There has to be an intra-Afghan dialogue. Everybody is calling for that. Taliban also have, in a way, agreed. They already met the Afghan opposition leaders in Moscow, and they were willing to meet those Afghans who are part of the government in their personal capacity in Qatar. That meeting was postponed because of disagreements over the size and composition of the delegation of 250 people. But I think there is a lot of expectation that this issue will be resolved, and maybe a lesser number of people will travel to Qatar to meet Taliban members.
Very well.
Ceasefire issue is more complicated. The call for ceasefire, I think Taliban will not accept that, because I believe they have told the Americans that they will start the ceasefire, they will stop fighting when the withdrawal starts happening. Because there's a lack of trust also. So they want to be sure that the foreign troops are leaving, and then they may, announce victory also. Taliban will say, look, we have pushed them out. This is what they want.
On that point you just made there, Yousafzai, because I think that's an important point you just made there. Ambassador Wazir, I wanted to get your thoughts on, can the Taliban also be trusted in this case? We talk a lot about the foreign forces, the US and NATO being in Afghanistan and the need for them to get out, but it's also a question of, can the Taliban be trusted at this time? Because in many people's hearts, I imagine the fear is that the moment the US and foreign forces walk away, the Taliban just take over, don't they?
Well, I don't agree with that. The Taliban are aware of the fact that nobody in Afghanistan is going to accept their government as it was before. The Taliban have to accommodate the other people also and have a government with them. But the Taliban would not declare ceasefire, as very rightly Rahimullah Yousafzai said, that until the Americans start moving, they are not going to declare ceasefire, because ceasefire, they think, is going to sort of begin the, if it is not a disintegration of Taliban, it would be obviously weakening their unity.
And do you agree with that? Do you think that's a legitimate concern, Ambassador?
Well, I think the Taliban are on their point. They are standing to their ground. From day one, they were demanding for the withdrawal of the foreign troops. And when that begins, then they can show it to the Afghan people that, look, we have forced the American to leave and we have won our point. So we are gradually going to go into a ceasefire, but depending on how quick the American can pack up and leave Afghanistan.
Okay, so Mirwais Khan, let me bring you back in, because I also wanted to talk about, in fact, the foreign forces and their role in Afghanistan, the continuing role. We obviously have the Americans, they've released their report about civilian casualties in 2018, and part of that, obviously, and one of the most important parts is civilian casualties in Afghanistan at the hands of the U.S. The estimates on the part of the U.S. versus the UN, Mirwais Khan, are vastly different. Why do you think that there are these discrepancies? And what does this then say about accountability and justice in this long-going war?
Waqar, I should first respond to one thing.
Sure.
You asked that can the Taliban be trusted? So I said they can be trusted, but American can't be trusted. There was a ceasefire in Eid, if you remember.
Yeah.
There was a ceasefire. At that moment, they captured 3 to 4 spies of American, who's the local Afghan government locals for a spy, which damaged the ceasefire. So it's a question is, should we hear is that can the American be trusted? not the Taliban, because the Afghan government is ready for peace talk, Taliban is ready for peace talk, people of Afghanistan is ready for peace talk, and the only question lies there is America.
We'll try to get him back on, but we're going to go into a very short break for now. Viewers, we'll be back with our guests right after that. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us, viewers. We continue to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, the U.S. role, the foreign role, as well as the Taliban and the peace process that is moving forward there. We're still joined by Mr. Mirwais Khan, Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, and Ambassador Muhammad Ayaz Wazir. Ambassador Wazir, I wanted to bring you back in right now and ask you, as far as the continuing U.S. role in the country, do you believe that that does need to die down, or do you think that, as the NATO head in Afghanistan said, NATO needs to remain in place in Afghanistan till there is a proper peace agreement in place?
Well, I think Khalilzad said repeatedly that no agreement would be concluded with the Taliban until we agree on all our important points. So that is obviously there, but the withdrawal of foreign forces for Taliban is a must. Without that, the Taliban are not going to conclude any sort of an agreement unless they are sure, because then their entire fight or jihad against the American or against foreign forces, then that turns out to be meaningless if they agree to their stay in the country. So that obviously creates problems. If they prolong their stay, that would obviously then prolong, unfortunately, the war also. So the war and the American withdrawal are going hand in hand. If they declare, like they have already declared to go, if they start picking up, if they reach an agreement with the Taliban that during this period, like I think they want to pack up within 1 year and a half, and Taliban wants them to leave earlier. So on that, if some agreement is reached and agreed upon, then obviously they can move on to the other 3 points, the ceasefire and the intra-Afghan talk and so on and so forth. But this is the real issue which can turn the fight on or off.
Mr. Yousafzai, I wonder what you make of that, because I wonder what your assessment about the strength of the Kabul government is at this time, because I wonder if NATO, if the U.S. forces walk away, does that mean the Kabul government is significantly weak? And then what does that mean for dynamics going forward then in Afghanistan?
I think after having stayed in Afghanistan for 18 long years, the NATO forces, the American forces would not just walk away. They will ensure that a peace agreement is signed and they have a face-saving solution, because the American President Trump, actually he wants to leave. He could have left earlier if he was not receiving sound advice from the Pentagon and the State Department. I think he was told that we can go, but we can leave in a more respectable manner. And they know that Taliban are desperate, that they have to show the withdrawal as their victory. So what is going to happen, if I am correct? I think the withdrawal, maybe they will withdraw some troops, but not all the troops. We know there are 14,000 Americans and 8,500 from the other NATO countries, so 22,500 foreigners, plus the private contractors. These are the so-called mercenaries, who may be about 26,000. I don't know what Taliban will make of that. So I think that, some may leave just to show the Taliban that, look, we are determined to leave, we want to leave, but let's have an agreement. So, the agreement, I think, the withdrawal, full withdrawal will only happen, I think, when there is a peace agreement.
Okay, so Mirwais Khan, I wanted to ask you, if we're looking at the Kabul government, if I can go back to that for a moment, and what its stance and what its strength is at this time, in your opinion, because, there are a lot of estimates, aren't there, about Taliban control of Afghanistan versus how much Kabul actually controls. And then there's just divisions within this government anyways. So, for example, Abdullah didn't take part in this Loya Jirga. He boycotted it, and a number of other leaders as well, apparently across Afghanistan, boycotted it because they didn't agree with the makeup of the Loya Jirga. Abdullah even accused Ghani of using this as an election campaign, essentially, leading up to the September 28th elections. With all these divisions just in Kabul, does that mean it's very weak?
Waqar, Kabul government is very weak because they are divided. They are divided from a long time, and now that's the reason that America moves toward to engage with Taliban. That's the reason they engage directly with Taliban, because they know that they are weak. Because the control of government is very in a minimum now. At the same time, the opposition and the people of Afghanistan are against what they were doing. In Loya Jirga, many people are forcing government to accept the peace talk and to let them America and Taliban engaged and finalize things and accept those things. That's because I got many friends in Loya Jirga, and people I know there, they are still they moved with this stance because they are forcing. And once it decided in Loya Jirga, then even as President Ashraf, it will be totally impossible for Ashraf Ghani to deny that if the Loya Jirga decided to move with what's going on. So President Ashraf Ghani will got no choice than that to accept that.
That's very interesting, isn't it, Ambassador Wazir? Because then this, again, going back to the divisions just within this Kabul government, that should be concerning, isn't it? Because if we want a peace agreement to last in the country, we have to have both parties at some sort of equal footing or, footing of strength on both sides, don't we?
Obviously, the two have to reach an agreement, only then peace can return to Afghanistan. But let's not forget the fact that Ashraf Ghani, his government has almost completed its tenure. He is living on an extended period given to him by the Supreme Court. And when a government reaches the dead end of its constitutional authority, it naturally loses the force behind it to conclude big deals with anyone, leave alone entering into a big deal with the Taliban, which has already denied to talk to them, considering it a puppet government. So the Afghan government and the other influential leaders who attended the conference in Moscow, and some of the leaders of the Loya Jirga, Duan Loya Jirga, there were objections from almost all sides, including Abdullah and Hamid Karzai and others. So it is purely a show of Ashraf Ghani. So until and unless these three get together and make a good delegation to talk to the Taliban would find one excuse or another to corner Ashraf Ghani's government to a side and talk to the rest of them. So it's a very difficult position now. I have always been saying that the Taliban, when they are talking to the Americans, that is a easier bit. With them, they can conclude some sort of an understanding or agreement. But when it comes to an intra-Afghan dialogue, that is the most crucial, the most difficult period. But let's have a little patience, because a fight of 40 years cannot just be done or concluded or finished within 1 week or 2 weeks or a month or two. It may take some time, but I think this is I shouldn't say the only chance, but the greatest chance that has come to Afghanistan to bring peace to their country. Now it is for the Afghans entirely how to deal, how to agree, and on what to agree, so the rest of the world the neighbor and the regional countries and the international world, they are watching.
Yeah.
They'll accept whatever is agreed upon, but the most important or $1 billion question is, will the Afghans agree on something?
And Mr. Yousafzai, do you think that the Afghans will agree on? Are you optimistic about that? Because, there were some positive signs in this jirga, weren't there? There was the participation of women, and women expressed their concerns as well going forward about their rights if the Taliban were brought back into the fold of somehow governing the country in some fashion. Do you think that there are positive signs here right now, Mr. Yousafzai, for agreement within Afghans?
If you bring the people together and 3,200 people has been claimed by the government, it's a big gathering. People come from all over the country. They have some influence in their communities and they're concerned about their country. So there is no real objection to having this kind of a gathering. But giving it the name of a lay jirga, consultative lay jirga, actually, the name of the lay jirga, the institution, that will become, less credible in future. Because lay jirga was a traditional, very high institution which was called in emergencies, and they used to make these very big decisions. But now, I have seen jirga, I attended these lay jirgas. One was called in 1987 by President Dr. Najibullah. The last communist president. Then he got his own supporters. Professor Burhanuddin Rabbani, when he was the president for 4 months, he called his own lay jirga, but called it Shura Al-Aqd, gave it an Arabic name. Now, Ashraf Ghani has called the jirga Hamid Karzai. So they all bring their own supporters. And they use the lay jirga for their own purposes. That is something bad, I think. And this jirga actually, has reinforced the divisions in Afghanistan among those people who are anti-Taliban. This has not contributed positively to the peace process. That is my worry. But I think that, eventually, I think there is some intention and there is a lot of activity now concerning the peace process. Americans talking to Taliban, Taliban talking to Afghans who were opposed to them. A lot of support from the international community, Afghans themselves wanting peace. So these are very positive signs. And we should remain hopeful because this, as Ayaz Wazir said, it is the biggest opportunity by far to bring peace to Afghanistan. This should not be wasted. I think these people who claim to be leaders of Afghanistan, they owe it to the Afghan people to finally end the bloodshed.
Okay, so Mirwais Khan, I wanted to ask you, do you think that these leaders, as Mr. Yousafzai there put it very well, that they will put the interests of the Afghan people first? Because, there's a lot at stake here, isn't there? I mean, there are a lot of obviously external forces in the country, a lot of money even flowing through Afghanistan, which unfortunately does not really, get to the Afghan peoples themselves or doesn't always make their lives better. But do you think that these leaders can really do what is right for their country this time around?
Yeah, this time I am very hopeful that they will look for just one thing, and that's Afghanistan. Because in this jirga, many youngsters are there. Instead of the old people, there are many youngsters who are more focused and more loyal to the Afghan soil rather than other things. So I'm very hopeful, and I wish, and it's my dream to see Afghanistan as a peaceful country. And I hope and I wish and I know that many people are engaged just to improve the Afghanistan situation. So let's hope for the best and pray that something good come out from this. And I hope that it will come.
Very well. We'll leave there as a final word, but of course we appreciate all the time, your insight and analysis. That was Mr. Mirwais Khan, international affairs analyst who covers Afghanistan affairs in depth. He was speaking to us from Islamabad. We were also joined by Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, who is a political and security analyst. He had been speaking to us from Peshawar, and we were also joined by former ambassador to Afghanistan, Ambassador Muhammad Ayaz Wazir, who was speaking to us on the line from the Pakistani capital as well. Now, as Mirwais there ended off, viewers, he ended off on a positive note. Ambassador Wazir also said that this is obviously a complex process. Once we get into the stage of intra-Afghan talks, it will undoubtedly be complex, even more complex than the talks between the Taliban and the United States directly. We're not even talking about accountability at this time for U.S. occupation, etc. Right now, we're just talking about the U.S. occupation forces. That is the term, of course, that is used by the Taliban leaving the country as a prerequisite in their minds for any peace agreement to go through. Then there's Abdullah and Ghani fighting over who really has influence seemingly behind the scenes and throughout the country. So Abdullah not even taking part in the Loya Jirga, even though he is the chief executive. All of these dynamics, very complex, and adding that much more confusion to whether or not a peace agreement really will happen. But then again, as Ambassador Wazir said, this is the biggest chance that the country has ever had for a peace deal to be made. We'll keep a close eye on that here in Scope. I'll be back with our next segment after the short break. Welcome back, viewers, and thank you for staying with us here in Scope. Now, news coming out of the occupied territories regarding any Israel-Palestine peace deal. The latest is that Jared Kushner, that is Donald Trump's son-in-law, has spoken about an indication that the plan that will be proposed, and this is something that he's been working on for 2 years apparently, will not be a proposal for two states for Israelis and Palestinians. And that, of course, has been the main goal, at least stated goal, by the U.S. establishment for decades when it comes to the peace process. On top of that, then, we have within the occupied territories a situation where an Israeli High Court has given the go-ahead for demolitions of Palestinian homes in areas in East Jerusalem and otherwise, where there will even be an archaeological park created, and many of those families are not going to be displaced from their homes. They have been displaced now for a second time since 1948, and when they were ousted from their homes and lands at that time. Well, to discuss this a bit further, we're joined up by Nicolai Due-Gundersen, who is a PhD candidate at Kingston University, London. His thesis focuses on non-democratic political legitimacy and the Arab Spring. He's joining us now from the UK. We're also joined by Mr. James M. Dorsey, who is a Middle East expert. He's a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University. He is joining us from Singapore. James and Nicolai, thank you both for joining us. And Nicolai, what do you make of Jared Kushner's statement there about the two-state solution? He has said that everyone should just wait till the plan comes out, but coming from somebody like Kushner, that is still worrying, isn't it?
It most certainly is, especially because we see the so-called peace plan coming at the back end of Trump cozying up to Netanyahu, recognizing the Golan Heights, recognizing Jerusalem as Israeli territory. So I think that from the Palestinian perspective, there isn't much hope of any amicable solution that will actually see Palestine want to have a dialogue with Israel and the United States. And this is a problem because I do feel that the Trump administration has really lost its credibility in the Middle East. You could argue the U.S. has lost its credibility since 2003, but Trump has made it worse. And so I don't really see that the so-called peace plan is going to be something that will bring Palestinians to the negotiating table.
Exactly, because, James, it's not like the Palestinians have been part of the process, right? I mean, the Palestinian Authority has been sidelined, its office even shut down in the U.S.
That's correct, but I think we really have no idea what's in that plan. What we're doing is working on assumptions. Now, the fact that Jared Kushner said that he was not making a clear, was not clearly advocating a two-state solution should not come as a surprise. Trump said that almost 2 years ago when he said it could be a one-state, it could be a two-state, it's up to the parties. And he's clearly made his preferences clear with the policies in terms of recognizing Jerusalem, moving the embassy, Golan Heights, his Iran policy, and so forth. And what that does really, in effect, is there's no reason for the Palestinians to have any confidence in the process. I think it would go too far, and there I disagree with my colleague, to say that the U.S. credibility in the Middle East has been destroyed, because that's clearly not true in the Gulf. It's not true in Egypt and in various other places. U.S. credibility in terms of being a nonpartisan mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict certainly has been shattered.
Yeah. Okay, so Nicolai, I wanted you to respond to that, what you just said, because certainly it does seem like in many parts of the Middle East, U.S. credibility still very much exists. And B, then I wanted to add on, if this process does go through without the Palestinian Authority, what do you think that even look like? Because then that essentially means that we're going beyond what the international community sees as Palestinian leadership and going directly to whom exactly?
No, I think that's my colleagues make it a very fair point that there's a difference between U.S. credibility in the Middle East as a whole versus in different regions of the Middle East and Israel, Palestine. That's a very fair point. I would say regarding, for example, the Gulf and Egypt, U.S. credibility with whom exactly? With the people of the Arab world or with their leaderships? Because let's face it, there is a difference between the people in power who go to Washington to make various deals and whatnot versus the pulse of the Arab street. I think that is a fair point to make. At the same time, if this deal goes through without the Palestinian Authority and without, should we say, popular Palestinian support, one of my concerns would be not just how U.S. legitimacy is affected within the so-called occupied territories, but would militia groups such as Hamas try to capitalize on this and use it as an excuse to launch more uprisings or more attacks? I'm also curious to what extent other regional leaders like Erdogan may also ride the wave of this, because Erdogan is someone who has opposed Trump quite strongly when it comes to Israel-Palestine. As we discussed previously, he's held meetings to refute the idea that Jerusalem should be Israel's capital. So I'm very curious as to how other regional powers will get involved with this peace plan, if they will push back or not.
Indeed, and I wonder, James, if there will be any back at this time. Obviously, we're speaking hypothetically at this time, but as you said correctly, the way this process has gone forth and the way the U.S. has acted throughout all these years already of this quote-unquote peace process obviously shows a bias on the side of Israel. But then I wonder, will the region react, or will everybody just sit down and accept whatever is presented, do you think?
I think there are two aspects to this. One is there certainly will be pushback. There's no question about it. King Abdullah of Jordan has made that already clear. You have divisions within Saudi Arabia, for example, in terms of the position that the king has taken versus the position that the crown prince has taken. I think it's correct that there is a distinction between regimes and the public. Fact of the matter is that in a lot of the Arab world today, the public has been silenced, and therefore those voices may not come to the fore. The second thing I think is there is no deal without a Palestinian buy-in. So, with other words, if there were what is now termed a deal, it presumably would be annexation of at least parts of the West Bank, those parts that are home to Israeli settlements. And it's, for all practical matters, a recipe for further volatility and unrest. One, because the Palestinians, and that includes the public, will not accept it. But the other is that annexation, certainly if it's annexation of all of the West Bank, poses real demographic issues for Israel.
Okay, so, Nicolai, many people would argue, I imagine, that the Palestinians should really get what they're offered even and should accept it, because at this time, if we genuinely look at the reality on the ground, Nicolai, these demolitions continue of Palestinian homes, the takeover of their lands continues really unabated at this time. What really is on offer, practically speaking, when it comes to land to the Palestinians, do you think?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, because we have to remember that even if some of these settlements are seen as illegal under international law, some observers would argue that doesn't matter. What matters is what is happening on the ground. And at the end of the day, if Israel and Netanyahu control the territory, including militarily, they get to decide what happens, which is kind of the problem here. So from that perspective, I think that the Palestinians feel that they're in a quagmire. Some of my colleagues who are of Palestinian descent, when they try to explain the issue to me, they've said to me, imagine if you're kicked out of your home and then 20, 30 years later, you're allowed to move back in, but only into the upstairs bedroom. You're not getting all of your home back. It's all or nothing. And some Palestinians do feel this. They basically say that if we don't go back to at least the 67 borders and East Jerusalem, which has a lot of symbolic and religious significance, there is no deal. And we have to put that within the context of what Israel is willing to do or not. their military strength and their relationship to the United States. I think also, to add to what my colleague was just saying about King Abdullah of Jordan, very correct what you just mentioned. King Abdullah, however, he has his own concerns. Firstly, he has a half Palestinian son who's a crown prince, and he is shifting support from the traditional Bedouin tribes to the Palestinians. That's one. Secondly, if I may, Palestine, for some leaders, it is sadly such an abstract issue now that they can easily talk about supporting Palestine because it's better to have their people protesting for rights in Palestine than protesting for lower gas prices and bread prices.
James, I wonder what you make of any viable Palestinian state as the situation currently stands on the ground.
I think there's a really legitimate question on whether the two-state solution really is a viable solution today. And I think that you're seeing among the Palestinians a growing thought that's been there for a long time, starting with people like Sari Nusseibeh 20, 30 years ago, but a thought that the Palestinian strategy really should be to become part of Israel, because then ultimately they would be a majority of Israel. And in many ways, I think that, there's a lot of thinking in that direction. And if this deal goes forward, certainly if it's a unilateral deal, in other words, one that does not have a Palestinian buy-in, you're then going to probably see, for example, a disintegration of the Palestine Authority of President Mahmoud Abbas, which again would move things in the direction of a one-state solution. And that is going to be very difficult as long as Israel defines itself as a Jewish state.
Indeed. Okay, so let's add another voice to this conversation. We're now also joined by Mr. Hassan Imran, who is a journalist. He is currently in Gaza. Hassan, thanks for taking your time out to join us here in Scope. Hassan, what do you make, specifically sitting in Gaza right now, of Jared Kushner's statement about this Middle East peace plan that he's been working on for 2 years? Is there really a possibility for two viable states, Israel/Palestine, living side by side?
I see. So basically, let's mention things the way they are. Jared Kushner is not simply an American delegate to Palestine or an American, statesman who's going to find solutions for the Middle East. He is a puppet for the Israeli administration, for Netanyahu. Whatever the Israeli right wishes, Jared Kushner would propose in a way suitable to be proposed by a superpower like the United States. Is there a chance for a two-state solution? I think the one who should be asked is Netanyahu. There was a chance for a two-state solution, but Netanyahu made sure, and the Israeli right, or the Israeli intelligentsia in general, made sure that this plan doesn't go forward, that a two-state solution shouldn't proceed. But in order to appear as a democratic, quote-unquote, a democratic state before the world, they had to find excuses. They had to expand settlements and then use it as a justification that Palestinians are not accepting these settlements. So why should we give them a two-state solution? Palestinians are not accepting the Jewishness of Israel. Palestinians are not accepting this or that. So they kept coming up with justifications, pretext, in order to avoid stating facts the way they are.
Okay, but Hassan, if I may come in for a moment, because in 2019 right now, then if we're speaking about the present day, as the situation currently stands, with demolitions of Palestinian homes continuing unabated, we know of just the Israeli High Court giving the go-ahead for more Palestinian homes in the West Bank, I believe in East Jerusalem, being demolished. And then we have ever more encroachment on Palestinian land. Do you think in this year, in 2019, that a two-state solution is even viable? What would a Palestinian state even look like?
Now, there is a reality in the whole historic land of Palestine, that there is only one state, Israel. There is no any other state right now. Palestine, it has some semi-autonomous institutions, but not a state. Geographically, Palestine cannot be connected. Like if you look at the map of West Bank, it has been turned into enclaves, Bantustan, just like South Africa. So practically speaking, there can't be a two states on given these circumstances. So Israel wants to maintain its what they call it demographic purity. be it as racist as it could be. They stated the way the way it is. Israel has to remain a Jewish state for the Israeli intelligentsia. So in order to avoid incorporating the Palestinian population, that is the majority, like
okay, so
Palestinians in West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, they had to establish how home demolitions, forcing them out in soft means in order to maintain the Jewish demographic hegemony in Palestine.
All right, Nicolai, I wanted to bring you back in, and it's disturbing, isn't it, Nicolai, that these demolitions that have just been okayed by the High Court, they're being okayed because an archaeological park wants to be built there. That by the municipality has been decided that should be a green space. With many of these people, again, as I had mentioned in my introduction, they're elderly refugees who were originally displaced, mind you, in 1948 and then moved to that area, and now they're being displaced again. They don't obviously have anywhere else to really go. This situation, again, by the international community doesn't really get the reaction that one would think it deserves.
No, I mean, you could call it almost a diaspora within a diaspora. I think I would also add to that the fact that I do believe some of these demolitions have been approved in East Jerusalem, which is very significant because East Jerusalem is meant to be Palestine's cultural, historical, and political capital. So we are seeing a lot of symbolism here to say that Israel is for Israelis only. I think to add to what my colleague in Gaza just said, the idea of settlements encroaching upon Palestinian space over the past several decades, I would call this politically pragmatic apartheid, because what they're trying to do, certainly the impression that they give, is to create a situation where Palestinian settlements become more and more fragmented. However many are left, they're more and more fragmented to the point where you no longer have a fixed space. You don't have an area where you can say this was Palestinian territory, and that strategy feeds into, I think, Israel's and certainly Netanyahu's attempt to deny the notion of Palestinian statehood, to say that, well, there never was a Palestine because we don't have a concrete territory or defined territory that is Palestinian. We have fragments of Palestinian settlements here and there alongside more and more Jewish settlements. So they're trying to attack the notion that there is an argument for Palestinian statehood, and therefore they're trying to attack the idea of a two-state solution.
James, one of the interesting things that Kushner and others have spoken about repeatedly when it comes to their peace plan, again, just bits and pieces that we've gotten over these 2 years that they've been working on it, is that the Palestinians need to have a stronger economy, that economic conditions for Palestinians need to improve. Is that enough? I mean, do you think if the Palestinians are given a good economy or given good jobs, etc., that they'll just sit back and possibly just give up their land?
Well, that's the assumption that Kushner is making. And I think he's going to find out that assumption is wrong. That, yes, Palestinians are concerned about their economic situation and want to see a development that gives them economic opportunity, but that's not going to resolve nationalist aspirations. I think there are two other points that I quickly would like to make, if I may. One is on Jerusalem. Fact of the matter is that Jerusalem was long ago legally annexed by Israel. What the recognition by the Americans has done is given them the cover to the political cover to expand the settlement of Jerusalem, the demolitions of housing, and so on and so forth. But legally, the annexation had already happened. The second point I want to make is, and that's where you really see the lack of U.S. credibility in trying to craft the peace process. One of the things that Jared Kushner said in this session at the Washington Institute this week, and which Trump has said himself, was that the Israelis would have to make concessions. Now, nobody knows what those concessions are. Nobody knows if those concessions are real. And nobody gives that statement any credibility because of U.S. policy and recent decisions that were in favor of Israel. But I think the jury is still out on what they're going to come out with.
Okay, so Hassan, you're in Gaza. You see the economic situation specifically in Gaza is quite dire. Do you think, Hassan, that if money essentially is just thrown at the Palestinians and they're given good jobs and a good economy of some sort, or at least the prospects of a good economy, that they will just give in?
like let's put things into context. There is an apartheid state depriving the Palestinians of their economic rights. There is a siege on Gaza, starving out Palestinians. There has been an occupation of like more than 50 years old. Like you put all this economic situation into this context, then you come up with one conclusion, that it has been intentional. Palestinians were not intended to be well off, to be living a dignified life, because if they do, they will be competing with the Israeli population, the rest of the Israeli population. So there has been an intentional plan to starve out Palestinians, to make their major concern to find food, to find bread, to find just, to pay the bill of electricity, to find internet in their houses, the basics of today's life.
So then, Hassan, and we're going over time, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this just within 30 seconds. If, somebody dangles bread and money in front of many of these Palestinians who have been suffering for so long, and no one would judge them then for reaching out and taking that, would they?
Like, if Palestinians are offered good job with no political rights, what's the point? Are we working machines?
Okay.
Is our purpose of life just to gain money and that's it? Like, okay, so it's basically like creating a robot, giving this robot some good, like source of electricity or source of like a good engine, and then telling this robot, please work well. You have your economic rights. What about our political rights? Civil rights? What about the Palestinians' right to return to their homes, to live a dignified life?
Okay. We'll have to conclude it at that point. Very good point to end on. That was Hassan Imran, journalist who is currently speaking to us from Gaza. We were also joined by Mr. James M. Dorsey, Middle East expert. He's a fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University. And we were also joined by Mr. Nicolai Due-Gundersen, who is a PhD candidate at Kingston University. His thesis focuses on non-democratic political legitimacy and the Arab Spring. Now, viewers, as our guests spoke about, what Kushner has mentioned vis-a-vis the two-state solution, that is, of course, speculation. He's asked for everyone to hold on and not to make any speculations about what exactly the deal does entail. And obviously, we do not know the specifics of the deal, but we can only try to gauge what's come out through news reports and otherwise over these past 2 years, as Kushner and others have been working on this, such as Jason Greenblatt, the U.S. Middle East envoy. We'll keep a close eye on how that develops, because at this point in time, as even Hassan there said, the reality on the ground is the Palestinians are spread out in such a fashion that it's very hard to see how a viable Palestinian state will even come out. Demolitions continue, as I said in my introduction as well. We'll wait and see how all of this develops in the days, months, and years to follow. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.